promote the participation of civil society, the ones who are closest to the response and who know best what the response should be, is also a challenge. But some of the progress that we've seen includes an increased emphasis on sustainability and local capacity development. So bilateral donors like USAID are increasingly requiring local implementation as part of their programs. And so there are opportunities to build that local capacity and make sure that the people who are best poised to make the response are involved in the actual implementation of HIV and AIDS response. There's also an increased emphasis on community system strengthening. We're seeing, for example, under the Global Fund new funding model, a lot of additional emphasis on civil society participating in those national strategic processes and having a seat at the table when those processes are happening. There's also an increasing support for knowledge hubs and virtual communities and technology to support health outcomes. So these create opportunities for organizations to more easily share information and learn from each other about how to respond to their various challenges. And then finally, we're also seeing an increasing collaboration with the private sector. So for example, the Kenya Ministry of Health has created a dedicated PPP unit to figure out how to foster public-private collaboration in health response. The Malawi National AIDS Commission recently, ACA helped them to create a PPP framework. So there are opportunities to leverage the respective expertise of the public and private sector to collaborate for increased health response, and that's being supported in a lot of different ways across the region. Africa Capacity Alliance is just one organization that focuses on regional capacity building, but our website, if you check it out, is there. Well, that's my email address, but it's the same for the website. And we welcome any contributions that you have, resources you can provide, or you can contact us for resources or support in terms of developing regional capacity. So thank you very much.
My presentation is building actually on what Christy has just made, in that when you look at capacity building from a regional, international, or national context, there are extremely many similarities, and there are many lessons that we can learn from across the board. So my presentation, I want to look at the context of civil society organizations here in Kenya, because I think that is very important. Look at the lessons that we have learned in capacity building here in Kenya, and then just talk a little bit about what next steps that we need to take. But before I go into the details, I just want to ask a question and say, why do we need capacity building? And simply put, we'll look at capacity building really as an investment. And an investment, when you make an investment, you expect to get profits or benefits at the end. And in our case, we are really looking at building capacity as an investment so that we can produce better and more results that are sustainable. And before we do capacity building, or we start to do capacity building, there are a number of prerequisites that we need to take into account. And one of those is really being able to understand what our needs are, where the gaps are, and then be able to set priorities on the basis of our findings. And then also adopting a long-term perspective, because capacity building is an ongoing process. It changes along the way, and you only achieve milestones along the way. And at every stage, you are perhaps going to need a different kind of capacity. But very importantly is commitment to change, because really capacity building is about managing change or bring about change. And change can only happen when there is commitment to make that change. And that is extremely important. The experience we have had, for example, recently with the Fanikisha Institutional Strengthening Project is that only those institutions that really had commitment to change were able actually to achieve that change. And those that did not demonstrate that commitment did not change nearly as much. And then there is need for flexibility and adaptation. We do different things, our needs are different, the environment changes, our institutions changes, even as individuals we change. The capacity building has got to be able to offer that level of, or that opportunity to be flexible and adapt to change as it comes. And then partnership and collaboration, which has been talked about a lot by the previous speakers, which is extremely important in capacity building. I would like to give a little bit of global background when it comes to really capacity building. Some of you might be familiar with what was called the Paris Declaration in 2005, and which was later followed by the Accra Declaration or the Accra Agenda for Action. These set certain principles which are really looking at making international development assistance more effective. In fact, they called it aid effectiveness during that conference. And they came up with certain principles that needed to guide international development assistance. And a lot of those declarations and principles actually were focused on bringing ownership of development to the local government or the local situation, or to be owned locally by the people where that development is taking place. In 2010, the Obama administration also came up with a global health initiative. And then we also have our own Kenya Vision 2030, all of which are really talking about improving health, but through strengthening local systems, strengthening local involvement, participation, and very, very importantly, owning the interventions that are being implemented by the local institutions or the local people. And I think these are very, very important aspects. Now, when you look at civil society organizations as integral players within a functional health system, then there was need for the global community, the national authorities to focus on building the capacity of local organizations so that they can be effective partners, working together with national governments at every level, working together with the donors to have an impact on the health of the people. So this is a very important, I think, foundation in recent years for institutional or for capacity building. And my focus is really going to be so much on the institutional aspect of capacity building rather than the technical aspects, although the two, I think, need to go hand in hand. Now, when you look at Kenya as a country, and you look at the civil society organizations and the way they have evolved over the past few decades, let's say, you can see that according to the data from the NGO Coordination Board, you see there's been an increasing trend of civil society organizations being registered with the board. But we also know that there are many other institutions that are involved with registering organizations here in Kenya. So really we are really looking at the tip of the iceberg. There are many organizations, civil society organizations in Kenya. So Kenya is a rich country when it comes to civil society organizations, and that's something very positive. There are spots when you would see like more organizations are coming on board, like for example, when HIV/AIDS was declared as a national emergency, during the recent devolution move and the movement towards the counties. So we see more civil society organizations coming on board, and I think this has been a very positive thing. Similarly, when it comes to the resources that are being invested on civil society organizations, much more money is actually going to civil society organizations, whether money coming from the government of Kenya itself, being channeled through civil society organizations, or money coming from international development partners. There's been a tremendous increase in the amount of money that is being channeled through civil society organizations. That means that the level of accountability or the expectations of accountability from civil society organizations has equally gone high. It has equally gone up. And therefore, we have to be prepared to play the role that is expected of us so that we can have the government, the development partners trust us with the level of resources that they are investing through civil society organizations. All that said, we still have quite a number of problems. And these are only just a few of those challenges that we still face as civil society organizations here in Kenya with regards to capacity. One, and very, very importantly, that although we see a lot of money going to civil society organizations, very little of that money actually goes towards building local capacity. And here we commend partners like CDC or even USAID and others who have decided to put some of that money towards really strengthening the capacity of local organizations, because money for capacity building is not easy to come by. Secondly, in Kenya for a long time we have lacked standards that can tell us exactly what capacity building is. You know, to the extent that it's very hard for a partner or the government or another civil society organization to come to say, this organization has this level of capacity and the other organization has the other level of capacity. And that has made it extremely difficult to make decisions about civil society organizations because we are not able to tell what standard we are measuring against. But not only that, the providers of capacity building themselves have not been able to give us a standard approach or a standard way of building a certain type of capacity because there has not been a standard, you know, to measure against, which is a very critical challenge I think we have faced. And so a lot of the capacity building initiatives, many of them are not replicable because they have not been based on a particular standard, nor are they exactly measurable. And that's a bit of a challenge. The other challenge that has been talked about much today is the poor resourcing. Poor resourcing in terms of financial resources as well as the human resources themselves. And all of that combined with all the other things we have seen so far this morning is that as civil society organizations, we have missed so many opportunities for us to be able to receive sufficient funds because our capacity is not known, because our abilities are not known to everybody, they cannot be measured and so on and so forth. So would-be partners are not coming to us just because of some of those challenges that we are facing. So as civil society organizations, what can we do or what do we need to do? One, as I said, institutionalizing and mainstreaming capacity building in program design and implementation. Because there are not going to be many donors like CDC that will give us the money to design and implement a capacity building intervention. But there could be many others that may see components of capacity building within a technical intervention. So we need to learn when we are designing programs to integrate that into that. Organizing and networking and working together. There is a lot of shared learning that can happen through networks and through talking to each other. And as I said, we have platforms for that. We need to maximize the available opportunities and resources for capacity building. And we are not really fully maximizing those resources at this moment, particularly those we know that can help us to do capacity building, and the resources we have internally within our own organization that can help us to do that. And then building the case and advocating for capacity building. And today I was happy to hear one of the speakers asking CDC to continue with this initiative and to help us to build more capacity. We need more advocacy. We need to be able to link our results to the level of capacity that we have. And because it is true, an organization has stronger capacity, gives better results and more results. But we have not been able to articulate that link very clearly. So we need to be able to do that. And then we need to devise alternative funding mechanisms. And people have talked about the public-private partnerships here, or working with private companies, but also working with other colleagues, other civil society organizations, working again with the resources that we have so that eventually we can achieve our goals. So in conclusion, I just want to just bring out just a few things that CSOs have to be recognized as an important player in a functional national health system. We are recognized to a large extent, but there is still much more to be done. We need to see that CSOs are recognized by all the players within the health system. And with local capacity building and organizational resilience for CSOs and sustainability and impact of these activities are achievable. And that message has got to be communicated. Now, opportunities for local capacity exist, but we are not taking maximum advantage of those, so we need to do more in that area. And last but not least, that the link between capacity building and programmatic results is very, very important. And that is something that all of us as organizations need to look at, so that our development partners, our government, are convinced that actually by building this capacity, I can get more out of this organization. So I would like to thank you so much for your attention. That's why I had my presentation. Yeah.
Mine is just one question. You talked about the fact that there should be a business case for the capacity building. Do you have examples of projects that have closed which have actually shown a value at the end of the project? If you can give us a few of those.
Not yet satisfied, especially when it comes to an issue of capacity building between DPOs and CSOs. There's a very good gap. So how can this be linked, or how can we work together? DPOs, which are disability person organizations, and CSOs. So if there's an activity, what ways can we be able to use? Probably when we get fund, then we involve them for future. How possibly can that be done?
My question is, what are the indicators of strengthened communities? Because we've really been hearing a lot about community strengthening system, community strengthening. What can a common person see and say a community, this community has been strengthened?
I think one question was whether there is evidence that demonstrates that capacity building generates results, and I think I'll link that to the last question that was asked. In fact, within the Fanikisha project, there have been a few case studies that have been done, that the organizations have been able to generate more results because their capacity has been built in certain areas. Like, for example, stronger project management and monitoring and evaluation system, they have been able to demonstrate, because the thing about data is that it tells you where you have started and where you are going and what you have achieved and so on. Organizations that didn't have systems to be able to measure that, we are able to realize that by building those systems to be stronger, they were motivated to do more, and actually they were able to generate results. But also, very importantly, several organizations actually became favorites to other donors, because when they were assessed, they were found to have much stronger capacity. And their existing donors decided to give them even more funding because they could trust them with more money. And so there is that evidence that exists. But about 5 years ago in Kericho, there was actually a real case study. It was like a case control sort of like study that demonstrated that an organization that went through certain capacity building compared to another organization that didn't go through capacity building, but they were both doing similar, actually, interventions. This organization with capacity building actually was able to do much more, and actually to have an impact, a real impact that was demonstrated. And that study was actually published, and I can link you up, I think, to where it was published. So there is some evidence, but not enough. I mean, as you realize that you need good evidence and more than what we have to be able to be convincing. Now, going to your question about how we generate that evidence, you really have to start from the beginning with the intention of generating that evidence or making that link. And so that is going to depend on how we design our interventions. It's not something that just happens out of the blue. It is something you've got to set out to do. You do it. You have like a controlled environment or whatever you want to use, but then that will be able to give you the evidence. And that is what is going to be believable. to many of the donors. So it's the way we design our interventions. We've got to do it better, I think, so that we can generate that evidence that links. I wanted to talk a little bit about several others. One was, how do we benefit from what was done previously? Kenya, I think, we've been very fortunate in that there have been so many capacity building interventions. And there are so many people out there, so many organizations that have got capacity, but we are not working together. We are not linking. We are a little bit unfortunate in that civil society organizations in Kenya is not as coordinated as it should be, as I think we all know that. But there are channels. Like, for example, within the health sector itself, there is a network, like, for example, the Health NGO Network, which really could provide a good platform, not just for people to come together and eat together and talk about what they have achieved, but also use it as a platform for learning from each other. Again, as I mentioned, the portal that I know very much about, the CSO portal, has got a wealth of information there that can be used actually to learn from and to be used because it is accessible to almost everyone who wants to access it. And there is a lot of information. They are very CSO-focused kind of like learning opportunity there that we could use. About whether the people who have been trained in capacity building right now are jobless. I think one of the challenges we have is that we look at capacity building as a project. And I've talked a lot today about institutionalizing this, so that capacity building is not dependent on the presence of a particular individual in an organization, but it should be dependent on the presence of a system that can outlive an individual. People move because you're not going to stop people from moving. Someone will move from organization A to organization B, but the capacity must remain behind. And for it to remain behind, you have to look at the systems and the tools that you have within that. So whoever comes in would still be able to fit in within that system. And maybe I think I should end there because there is so much else we can do. We have a lot of tools in Kenya, again, just to emphasize that point, that we can access. And we have mechanisms of accessing those tools and really using them effectively to strengthen our capacity. Maybe Christine and Carol.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to the questions, multiple questions touched on the issue of how do we learn from what's already been done and how do we share that information. And I'll tie it with Dr. Wanjiku's question about specific examples of health system strengthening in the region. The answer is yes, those examples do exist. And off the top of my head, I can think of specific case studies from WHO, the World Bank, and USAID that demonstrate progress in terms of health system strengthening. But the issue is that, and this is true for all of learning from what others have done, there's never going to be an exact replica of what we need. So it's being able to pull from bits and pieces of what others are doing around the country, around the region, and being able to meld those together for the situation that we are currently looking at. And part of the issue is, how do we find all of those resources? They exist, and we know that there are tools for bringing that information together, like the CSO portal or the HIV Capacity Forum. And part of it ties into the issue that we're living in this age of data, right? And there's so much information out there. How do you know what's good? And how do you know where to find it? Because there's so much to wade through. And part of the answer to that is that we all have to make sure that we are contributing to the broadcasting of good information. So when you have a wonderful case study like Ungana, and you have specific lessons that are learned, you need to be able to clearly articulate what those lessons are, and you need to be able to sing about them from the mountaintops and make sure that you're talking about them in the right forums where the right people are sitting, and so that that information can be taken and put into places where others can easily find it. And it's not a simple problem, but it's something that means everybody has to participate in the distribution of that the collection and the distribution of that information. So, we have to motivate ourselves on a daily basis to stay current with what's happening. So identify those tools, those sites that you can go back to again and again, and that you can contribute to. So become a member of a community of practice. Become a member of some of these portals that try to convene or collect information from all the players that are involved in capacity building. And that's really, that diligence is the way that we will make sure that the lessons that have learned are not just wasted and they don't linger on a dusty shelf somewhere, but that they are used again and again to make sure that we're actually, sustaining the capacity that we've built.
My name is James Munguti. I coordinate TB and HIV activities in Boni Sub-County, in Makueni County. Our director, Dr. Mutuku, who is also the TB HIV coordinator, is engaged somewhere. They are cascading down the HIV new guidelines in Kitui. So this is a brief that I was told to write yesterday in the evening, and I think I've captured almost everything.